Okay, ready to go. Happy Friday. It is Friday morning, February the 8th, and I am recording this at approximately 11 o'clock in the morning. And I've got lots of things to chat with you about today. On Monday's video, my name is Caroline, and this is my channel, Off the Grid Needlearts. I do a regular floss tube video on Mondays, and on Fridays, this is my Stitch With Me video. On Monday, I talked about how I was going to try really hard and do a better job of looking at comments and questions that people had left me on the previous video and make sure that I answered everybody. So I figured I would save Monday's comments for Monday's video and Friday's comments for Friday's video. Except I have one exception today. I had a comment from last Monday's video, so 2 Mondays ago, that went into my spam folder on YouTube and I missed it. And I thought it was a really great comment, so I wanted to make sure that I talked a little bit about it today, and hopefully that that lady will hear it. I did leave her. I'll talk about that in a little bit. I have a list today again. I had to write things down. Okay, so as you can see, like I said last week, my focus piece for the Stitch With Me videos this month in February is going to be my modern folk embroidery mystery season sal from 2018. And I'm stitching this on a 40 count R&R Reproductions linen in the Patriots Brew colorway. And the thread that I'm using is a discontinued silk from Vicki Clayton hand-dyed fibers, and it's just the most beautiful cobalt blue. The colorway is actually called Zafra Cobalt. She had some really neat names for her thread. So I thought today, since I have a lot of different things to talk about, I would try to keep the stitching on this piece as simple and straightforward as possible. So my plan for this video, and I'm not sure how much I'm actually going to get done. And as you can see, I've gone back to my dominant hand underneath just for this video, only because with the lighting today and where the camera position is, it's already a little tricky to see. So I want to make sure that I'm not going to be making a whole bunch of errors. So I'm going to keep it really straightforward, my stitching today. You can see I have a needle. Oh, I had a needle. I had a needle marking down here approximately where I was going to be stitching to, but clearly that is the needle that I just absent-mindedly took out of the fabric and threaded to start to use. And in fact, I am going to I'm going to unthread this because I think this is okay, so we're going to get into a little bit of my needle preference here. This is a bowen needle, which a lot of people love them. A lot of people swear by the bowen needles. That's these ones right here. I find them a little dull. I like a sharper tip. And I find that the tip on the bowen needles are just a little bit, again, this is approximately, because this motif carries down farther into here, but I just want to, approximately get to where the end of the page is. The bowen needles, I find them a little dull. My favorite needle is the John James 28. Not a petite. I have big hands. I'm a tall woman. I do not like the petite needles. I find them too small. Not that that probably has anything to do with my height, but I have large hands. Petite needles feel like they're going to disappear. So these are the John James Tapestry needles. I buy them in 25 packs. I bought a whole pile of these when Kathy and Neil still had their shop. So I'm good for needles for a while. So I will frequently have 3 or 4 needles on my needle minder at a time just so happens I can tell that that's a bowen because it's just not finding the hole in my 40 count the way that I am used to. See, this one I think I'm good to go with this one. I think this is a John James. The other brand that has a slightly sharper tip I find is the DMC Needle. And I've got a package of those here too. So those are the DMC needles. I tend to stick with the 28s. They're just my favorites. Just my preference. Yeah, that's better. So there you go. You can see I'm back with my dominant hand underneath, only because let's just keep things simple today. Okay. So the comments from last week's Friday Stitch with Me were awesome. You all always leave me such wonderful, wonderful comments, and I read them all. And so now I'm really pleased that I'm making a concerted effort to have a little set aside time where I take 10-15 minutes and I go through all the previous comments from the week before, hit that love button, leave a little comment if I can, and then, discuss the ones that need discussing on the next video. So the first one that I'm going to talk about came from Sherry. And Sherry is a frequent commenter on my channel. So hi, Sherry. Thanks for all your great comments. And Sherry wanted to know about my scroll rods because I was saying that my tension was a little loose last week. And if you've been watching these videos for a while, or even if you're new here, you may notice that the tension on my fabric is not drum tight. In fact, last week was probably a little looser than I even normally have it. And I think I said something in the same breath as because I was practicing my left hand underneath. And I may have mixed up or been a bit muddled about what I was saying. I hadn't done it intentionally because I was practicing the different style of teaching. In fact, if anything, a tighter tension probably would make things easier, but I can totally see how what I said was confusing. So the really tight tension isn't overly important to me. Lots of people really, really love a drum tight tension. And I know Ginger Gerald is one of them. And lots of other stitchers. Off the top of my head, I talk to Gerald all the time. So I'm going to mention him a lot on my channel. We're very good friends. He uses, and of course the question compared my frame to his. Gerald uses the Almanac system of frames, and if I'm not mistaken, the Almanac system is very similar to a Millennium style frame, which provides, you can crank those rods so that the tension on your fabric is absolutely tight as a drum. My system is, I could fiddle with this a lot more. I have friends who use the same frame as I do, and they will use suspender clips and things like that on the sides of the on each side to attach it to the side of the frame to provide a tighter tension. I really like to crank the rods. So it's a scroll rod system. This is a Hearthside Craftworks frame. And I also use Kay's Creation frame, and I use the scroll rods interchangeably on the two. Sometimes they use different end bits, but the Hearthside rods fit inside the Kay's Creation frame. I did have my husband drill a few extra holes in some of the sidebars, but I can't remember which ones those were. Generally, if I own it, I just try to make it work. Having a super tight tension isn't overly important to me. As long as I can see the holes and I can stitch nice and quick, and it's generally, a little tight and not really, really floppy, then I'm good. So, hopefully that answers your question. it's a different frame system than Gerald uses, and he really likes a super tight tension on his fabric. Okay, so thank you, Sherry. The next question came from Charlene, and this is a good one. This one comes up often, and I think it's an important thing to remember that not everybody knows how to do this, because when you've been stitching for a while, you sort of take certain things for granted, or if you have an LNS and your shop owner of your LNS always figures this out for you, then it might not be something that you generally tend to think very much of for yourself. So this has to do with estimating the size of fabric. Charlene wanted to know how I knew how big of a piece of fabric to use for this piece, for Jacob's piece. Jacob's piece. And it's a great question, and there's a really easy way that everyone can learn how to figure out exactly what they're going to need. You only need a couple of pieces of information before you start. You have to know the stitch count of the piece. And that information is always found on your pattern. So I'm going to pause this video for a minute, and I'm going to go and find the information on Modern Folk Embroidery's pattern that gives me the stitch count, so that I can show you how I figured out what size of piece of fabric that I needed. So, back in a minute. Okay, I'm back. So I've got the very first page of Jacob's pattern here. This was information that came with part 1, which was January. Now, because there's no pattern here, this is simply strictly information about how to work his pattern. I think that he would be perfectly okay with me sharing this information with you. So in the pattern here, and you'll have to look at your pattern because every pattern lists how to find this information a little differently. But what you're looking for is your height and your width of your number of stitches. So my design, the entire thing, measures 382 crosses high and 251 crosses wide. So that's really important information that I need to know. The second piece of information that you have to know is the count of your fabric that you want to work it on. And that's key. Don't calculate it based on the fabric that they suggest you use. Make sure that you're doing that calculation based on the fabric that you actually are going to use. Because, well, we all have different taste. We all stitch on lots of different stuff. So with those two pieces of information, the size of your design in cross stitch, and the type of fabric that you're using, you go to something called, well, this is the one that I always use. It's called the cross stitch calculator. So I just type in cross stitch calculator because I never have it bookmarked. I always have to look it up again. So it's the cross stitch calculator, cross stitch calculator, and it's this one here, Yarn Tree. So I always use this one, and it comes up and it looks like this. There's also an app that has a cross stitch calculator that I've got on my phone, and since I'm recording on my phone off the top, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but Deb and Liz from Country Stitchers, they've mentioned it a few times as well, so perhaps you're a little more familiar with that one. Okay, so we take our information and we basically plug that in here to our cross stitch calculator. So I know that I have, so I know my height. I'm going to put in my height first, 382, and I know that it is 251 stitches wide. My fabric count, that's threads per inch. So I know I'm doing this on a 40 count linen. And then the number of threads that each stitch covers. Okay, so Aida is 1, linen is usually 2. And I am stitching this design 1 thread over 2. So number of threads that each stitch covers, that is going to be a 2. I really doubt that anyone's going to be stitching this design on a 40 count linen 1/1, but you know, crazier things have happened. Okay, so here's where we get into the next part. Extra fabric on each side for the border. I like 3 inches. And as long as I plug in 3 inches, I know that that's all the extra fabric that I want around the outside. This extra fabric on each side for finishing, I always ignore that. I zero that out. So 3 inches around is what I want. So that's basically going to be the size of your design plus 6 inches of extra fabric, 3 inches on all sides. Okay. So I've got all of my information plugged in, the size of the chart, this actual stitched piece, my fabric count, and whether I'm stitching it 1/1 or 2/2, and very critical that you include that extra fabric in your calculation. Otherwise, your piece of linen will not be big enough. You will only have a piece of linen that will be just enough for your stitching and nothing else, and then you're in trouble when you want to frame it or finish it. And then you just hit the calculate size button and it gives you the answer. So the stitched area will be 12.5 inches wide by 19 1/8 inches high. So that's what my design should work out to be. The fabric should be 18.5 inches by 25 inches high. So that's the size of your fabric that you need. And this fabric, indeed, I did these exact steps to find the size of piece of fabric that I would need. So the piece of fabric I'm using is 18.5 by 25. And I think I might have even been a little bit generous with that 18.5. It's probably closer to 19. And then I would suggest using a size 28 tapestry needle. I suggest using 1 strand of floss for stitching. So it's just a really, really handy little thing to use. And you can never go wrong. Well, famous last words. I mean, human error, right? If I started stitching this sideways by accident and I started in my 25, I've done that before. Human error. So it's not foolproof. You have to actually make sure the orientation of your fabric is the right way up, and then you're good to go. So cross stitch calculator, yarntree.com, really incredibly useful tool. I use it all the time. So I hope that helps. And Charlene, thank you for the question. I hope that helps you. So that was that. Oh, I had a really nice comment from Michelle Cranford. So I just wanted to say thank you because, I love questions. But I also love if someone takes just a moment to say, that what you were talking about, it sounds really nice and your family sounds nice, and those kinds of things are just really sweet. And Michelle left me a lovely comment, and I wanted to share because it just kind of made me happy. So she says the kids. Oh, and in case you missed last week, my family, John took the 2 kids over to the cottage. They snowshoed over the ice and spent a very fun weekend at the cottage. They had a ball, and chances are they may go again next weekend. It is Family Day weekend here in Ontario, and that means that Monday is a civic holiday. So it's the perfect time for them to go again because it's quite a journey. It's a long drive. It's a long trek over. You have to pack everything in. And so it's quite tiring. And so for John to make the effort to go, it's nice for them to have a few extra days to spend up there and just kind of relax into it once the cottage warms up a little bit. So Michelle said, the kids look like they are having a fine time, and your husband, John, sounds like a treasure. Well, Michelle, my husband, John, is a treasure. So, we have been married for, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to count. I'm one of those wives. We were married in 1996 and it's 2000. Okay, so we're coming up on 23 years in October this year. And we met when I was 2 weeks shy of my 16th birthday. he's a little bit older than me. He's 5 years older than me, almost 5 years older than me. So we have been hanging out together for a very long time. And I still think that I made a pretty good choice all those years ago. He is a great husband and a really, really, really great father to our kids. And our kids are pretty lucky. So in case, and I'll probably mention this again on Monday for those who don't watch the Stitch With Me video, but if you watched Monday's Floss Tube episode, it was actually so funny because the principal came on the loudspeaker and called my son. If I do that, I could get into trouble. Hang on a second. Because what I was going to do is I was just going to go up, but I'm not sure that I'm in the right spot. I think I'm going to avoid doing that. We're just going to avoid that little potential problem there. So the principal came on over the loudspeaker and called my son to the office while I was recording Monday's Floss Tube. And I had no idea. It was frankly very surprising to me because, well, he's a pretty good kid. He never gets called to the office. I mean, he's gotten in trouble a couple of times, but it was pretty minor stuff. Not worthy of being called to the principal's office. And so anyways, long story short, John had picked him up. John was picking him up to take him on a Meals on Wheels delivery. And so of course the school had called him so that he would come to the office so that he could leave with his dad. And somebody left me a comment. Didn't you know that your husband was picking him up? And that's kind of funny because no, I had no idea. And that's not unusual. And it's perfectly, totally normal. I just didn't know. And having him called to the office, I had no idea. John is a volunteer driver for Meals on Wheels, and he's more like he's like a relief driver, if that makes sense. So if they have a regular driver who is ill or can't make their rounds that day, the office will often call John, who John has his own business, so he can be somewhat flexible sometimes during the day, and if he is available at lunchtime and they call him, he will frequently come and he'll frequently go and do the delivery for whoever needs filling in for. When he first started doing this, he filled in for a man who had broken his hip. And so John did his rounds for, oh goodness, it was like 6 months or something like that. And so that was way back when Sarah was little. And so John started when he had time to drive over to the kids' school and pick her up. He would pick her up and he would at lunchtime and he would take her on the rounds. And Meals on Wheels it's a fantastic program. It really is a fantastic program. And a lot of the people that they saw, didn't get a lot of exposure to little kids all that often. And it brought many of them a lot of joy. And there were numerous times that Sarah would come home with, some random treat, dug out of some lady's purse or something like that, because they just love the kids. And so whenever he can, John will, if he gets called to do a delivery, if he is at all able to, he'll come and he'll pick up the kids, one of them. And Sarah's, she can't do lunchtime deliveries anymore, but actually Sarah volunteers with Meals on Wheels here in their main office now. So she has been involved in the Meals on Wheels program since she was about 8 or 9, and Nicholas started going with John when he was about 6 or 7. So that's why Nicholas was being called to the office on Monday, which was so funny. But anyways, long story. I'll keep it brief on Monday when I say it again, I promise. But yeah, he's a treasure. Now, keep in mind, we've been married 23 years, so he's a treasure most of the time. 95% of the time. Oh, we'll give him 99% of the time. Okay. So, Michelle, thank you for your comment. It's good for me to remember that my family are pretty great. And look at that. I would have been right. I would have been in the right spot. But that's okay. It's all good. Okay, next up was Myra. Myra. Oh, Myra, I'm getting to meet Myra in a few months, and I'm quite excited about meeting her because I have a feeling she's a phenomenal stitcher, and I can't wait to see what she's working on. She left me a comment on how I was, and it's because of Myra really that I'm trying to stitch with my dominant hand on top. I have been practicing. I've been doing a little bit of practicing, but I'm really slow and really it's uncomfortable still, but that's okay. That's how we learn. That's how we learn. So let's do one stitch here in honor of Myra's encouragement for my really super slow two-handed stitching. Oh my goodness, that was kind of sad, wasn't it? Let's do one more. The first one didn't count. There, that was a bit better. We'll just finish this X. And then there. Okay, see? I did it. There was my little practice for the day. So I took a little photo of Myra's comment so that I could read it properly because I thought it was really interesting and important information to share. Let's see. Can never find the photos when you want them. Okay, here it is. I love that you're teaching yourself to stitch with your right hand on top. You mentioned that one of the advantages is that we can see your stitching better, which we can, and it looks good. Thank you, Myra. However, there's another advantage which you may not be aware of, but we are. You will learn to not touch your stitching as much with your fingers. If you were to branch out in your stitching to do, let's say, gold work, the fabric material would be different as well as the floss. The stitching method would stay the same. However, if you touch the surface with almost every stitch, the oils from your fingertips would stain your project. I learned the hard way many years ago. So that I think that's a really important fact. So if you have plans or designs on, becoming a better needle worker in general and honing your craft, then that's an important thing to practice. And I think that's a really interesting thing because it's true. When I have my left hand on top, I do touch the fabric more. And then when my right hand is on top, I'm not leaning that hand on the fabric. I'm waiting for it, and then I'm pulling up. So my hand is more on, you can't see this. Sorry. My hand is resting on the scroll frame at the bottom. My fingers are not on the fabric itself nearly as much. So that's really interesting, Myra. And thank you for leaving that comment. I love sharing little bits of things like that with everybody. It's fun. Okay, the last comment that I shared to talk about today was from Patsy Williams. And Patsy left this comment on 2 Mondays ago video, and it got shuffled into my spam folder for some reason. I'm not sure. I don't always remember to check. And so I missed it last week. And I apologize, Patsy, that this is a little late. And hopefully you see, I left you a comment that I was going to talk about this today. So I hope you see it. If I don't hear from you, maybe I'll mention again on Monday so that you can have a little listen. So Patsy's comment, I just loved it. So let me read about here. She says, okay, so Patsy says, I kind of hang back on my comments because although I'm a many years stitcher, I'm just a basic stitcher. I feel pretty amateur compared to many floss tubers. I stitch on 14 count Aida with DMC. I have never been to a retreat and I probably won't. I hear your anxiety. I do love to stitch and I think I have created many pretty items. So there's a lot here in Patsy's comment that, a lot to think about, a lot to, if we were sitting down and having a cup of coffee, this would probably be like an hour-long conversation because there's so much in there that is just human stuff, right? She hears my anxiety because, well, she might feel that way too. But the comment that I wanted to focus on was that she thinks that she's just a basic stitcher and she feels amateur compared to other floss tubers. And that I'm going to think here that she's equating that with stitching on 14 count Aida with DMC. And that's, if I'm wrong about that, Patsy, correct me, please. But is that why you're feeling like you are an amateur compared to other floss tubers? And let me be really clear here. I think that just because those of us who record floss tube videos, we're all amateurs as well. I mean, we are all amateurs, right? I am not, this is not a job. This is just fun. And it's a hobby and we do it for pleasure. Now, it's also a passion. It's a hobby that's a passion. And I've managed to turn it into, something pretty darn fun where I have gotten to meet so many friends and new people around the world. But if you're stitching on 14 count Aida with DMC and you love it, then that's just as awesome as 40 count linen with silk thread. You're a cross stitcher. I'm a cross stitcher, and we share that joy of putting your needle through thread. I mean, that's, in a nutshell, that's really what it is that we're doing. We're sticking a needle in and out of thread, of fabric with thread, right? Doesn't matter what kind of fabric it is. It doesn't matter what kind of thread it is. We're making a design. We're making something beautiful. And your last comment where you say, I do love to stitch and think I have created many pretty items. Well, that right there, there's your joy. I mean, you've created those things. So I really appreciate you leaving me a comment because, I think that we all deserve to feel like we're all part of a bigger community, no matter what we're stitching on. And, Aida's pretty awesome. I have stitched all of my landmark tapestry designs on, it's an 18 count Aida, but if 14 count had given me the look that I was wanting, I would have stitched it on 14 count Aida, and those are all stitched with DMC, and I am absolutely in love with them. I don't think that they're less than just because they're on Aida with DMC. And so you should be proud of yourself, and you should, consider yourself not an amateur, but a part of a community. Anyone who stitches. Doesn't matter if you're brand new or if you've been stitching for 40 years. That's kind of the cool thing about meeting everybody on FlossTube and on Facebook and Instagram, and it kind of turns this little hobby into something pretty special. And will you look at that? I finished that little middle section. Pretty great. Let me sew in my end. There we go. And clip that thread. And I am done. That was, I managed to chat about everything that I wanted to chat about today. I don't think I missed anybody. I love your comments. I love your questions. And yeah, I get asked the same questions sometimes that I've already answered before. And I don't mind a single bit because trust me, not everybody can watch every single episode of FlossTube that's out there. There's too many wonderful things to watch. So I may have talked about something before that you missed and you have a question and you want me to answer it. Happy to answer it. So I am pretty pleased with that. That is looking pretty beautiful, if I do say so myself. A few days ago, I did some work in here. You might not have noticed, but I'm going to point it out because it's a little bit of progress since Monday. I finished this snowflake here and I'm starting to work down in here. So before I move over to the right, I'm going to finish this little bottom corner of February and then finish February and then move right into March. So hopefully by the end of February, I will have all 3 months complete. We'll see. That's the plan anyway. Yeah. Okay, so now I can move my little needle there. Looks good. Looks good. Okay, so happy Friday. I am off to finish some more sewing for Evertote. It's been a bit of a crazy few weeks actually with the weather up here. My kids have had Nicholas has had a snow day and an ice day where all of the schools in London were closed. Buses weren't running, schools were closed. Everybody basically stayed home because it was dangerous outside. And both Sarah and Nicholas were home for a day. And anyone who works from home knows that working from home presents its own challenges when you live with other people who this is their space where they are away from the world and they're home and you're their mom. And so it has made getting some work done over the last week a bit of a challenge. And I'm wanting to finish some things up today so that I have some bags out that really should be in the mail already. So if you're waiting for a bag from me, it is coming as fast as I can do it. I'm not adding anything new in the shop until everything is out the door. I have, I do have one more large bag that I'll be putting in later tonight, but not until a few other orders have gone out. And then, yeah, maybe there'll be some new bags next week. We'll see. We'll see how things go. If we get another ice storm or another snow day, no promises. FedEx actually would not come and pick up the box. They called me and they canceled my pickup because it was too dangerous for their drivers to be out on the road. Canada Post canceled. At noon, they pulled their postal workers off their routes and sent them home, which was really a wise decision. It was dangerous out there. So everything up here is a little behind and we're trying to get caught up and whatnot. I am a one-woman show, so answering emails and customer questions and sewing and packaging and postage and all that stuff takes a lot of time. I love it. I love it. No complaints. I just wish I was a little faster. I wish I could work a little faster. And I feel like I'm working pretty fast, but I always feel like, I wish I could just squeeze in one more thing. But anyways, doing these videos is also important to me as well. Keeps me feeling connected. So have a wonderful weekend. I will see everybody tonight on the Friday Off the Grid Facebook group. I can't wait to see what you're working on, what you're stitching, and what your plans are for the weekend. And if you're not around this weekend, if you have other plans, then maybe we'll get to visit together on Monday for a regular Monday floss tube update. Happy weekend. Happy stitching.